My presentation for this is my presentation for Comstead, and it's going to be Honors and MCLX, which is going to be the title presentation for a year in the a year in 1960. Sorry, by Victor Sandoval, which is me. So what $1 could buy you in 1960? So $1 was able to literally afford you. It was going to be 10 Western apples, or generally today you need $1 or more for a single apple, 1 pound of chopped beef, and then you also get 5 fast food burgers for $1. So imagine going in and out and getting like a whole family meal for like a buck. Like that's crazy. What else? You also get a 12-ounce can of Coca-Cola, and then you get several drive-in movie tickets. Yeah, so you read that correctly. That was literally several drive-in movie tickets for $1. Um, oh, I'm sorry, one. And then you also get 3 gallons of gas, which is good if you're driving a V8. And then you also do get a 100-count bottle of Bayer aspirin. So, there's also that. Politics in 1960. So the first televised presidential debate occurred in a pivotal moment in media convergence where live audio and visual was shown to the public and principles of public presentation along with rhetorical eloquence. So we had the 1960s when we had, I believe it was Dwight D. Eisenhower that was leaving office, and then we were getting Nixon and Kennedy coming in and showcasing what they had to do. And I think that their positions and whatnot. And it seems, from what I understood, is that Nixon presented a better I guess, a public speaking prowess. So he was better at communicating, but Nixon was a better presented person. He was also a lot younger as well. He was like the youngest president that we had at 35. So there's another thing that we, is interesting in noting. And it's largely credited to media because his presentation was made possible to be conveyed through the convergence of, television. And that's something that really played out for him well. Kennedy was also the first Catholic and the youngest president to obtain the office. Frank Sinatra performed his song High Hopes for Kennedy's campaign. So similar to how a lot of presidents nowadays will feature artists like Snoop Dogg, I think a president not too long ago featured Nickelback as well, and they had like their own little people present for them at their inauguration. It just so happened that during the campaign, Kennedy had Frank Sinatra playing for him, and that's a pretty good song too. I think it has a very interesting chorus. So yeah, so there's gonna be a YouTube video as well for there, so you can see kind of how that happened. And then what else do we have? We have several 1960s movies that was occurring. So 1960s movies, we have some that started in Naples, Millionaires, Visit a Small Planet, and then several other two other movies there kind of played on the innuendo. So yeah, so this is kind of the artistry that was occurring. So during film in cinema in the 1920s featured innuendo references to sex, drugs, and crime. Historians called this the pre-code Hollywood industry that self-imposed moral codes for motion cinema in order to market effectively, called Hays Codes. So the movies that I showed you were a kind of this is how Hollywood operated before we had the formal rating system, which really kind of put a stamp down. But yeah, and it's really interesting because we had a lot of movies that I don't think much has changed. I think if anything, stuff has gotten more raunchy. However, they did have quite a bit of censorship and regulation back in the day, and it was all self-imposed. It wasn't, there wasn't anybody doing that. And then we also had in the 1960s the introduction of censorship. So this is what I'm talking about now, for in favor of a formal rating system that replaced the Hays Codes, and that essentially made it disappear. And then motion pictures ushered in new waves of scandalous new content that was all for $1. So I think media and cinematography still remain relatively affordable. Yeah, so this is a video showcasing the Hays Codes, just so you can understand kind of how that operated. And then music in the 1960s. Now, this is really interesting. And the music in the 1960s fell heavily into the electric sound, R&B, rock and roll, and soul, all had their roots in the Mississippi Delta. So it was mostly the culture of freed African Americans that were actually laid the foundation for American arts. And that's something that I'm actually really grateful for. Even the music that I listen to today, like rock, stuff like My Darkest Days, Nickelback, 3 Days Grace, like anything that I can attribute myself to, like the music that I like has its roots in that, which I think is really interesting. It was really cool to find that out. So yeah, so these people gained autonomy and then sought economic, once they were freed, right? They actually gained autonomy. They began to actually seek out their own opportunities, and they went to the north. So they went to places like Chicago and started to actually integrate their musical heritage with the sounds that were in that particular area. So they started to electrify their music. And they also they ended up coming up with Chicago blues. And then we had artists like Motown coming up, like labels like that. They were black owned and black operated. And they were, later in the decade, blues and rock exploded. So later on after that, we got the foundations for what I listen to today, which is rock and metal, right? And that's where that started, which is really cool. Yeah, so I think, let me see. Musical hits from Motown included Shop Around by the Miracles, a good song, by the way. And then, let me see, Muddy Waters at Airport, which is an album I believe that they had going on in 1960. Later, Elvis Presley and Bob Dylan became popular. So later on, we had white artists coming in and actually showcasing what they had to do because they were essentially integrating into what they thought was a very lucrative and a very good market. 1960s technology. Trios 1 was launched by NASA, a weather satellite launched in the 1960s, along with Echo 1, which is a communication satellite. They later laid the foundation for further satellite communication arrays. These technologies converged into new broadcasts and allowed for Americans to understand their weather progressions in real time. This added to the image of the U.S. During the national space race against Russia. During this time, the Digital Equipment Foundation also launched one of the first computing systems that actually had a mouse and a keyboard, which paved the way for interactive computing, later introduced this was actually introduced by IT Law. So that's where I got my source from. 1960s fashion. Fashion in the year 1960 was undeniably conservative, but there was a flair for sexual innuendo and illicit experimentation with exposed skin and style. So women wore more fancy dresses and business casual. So did men, stylized with hats and hair. However, it did seem like women had more freedom to express, while men just wore fancy hats and tailored suits. In summary, the year 1960 presented an era of mid-century growth and cultural identity of a nation that was still relatively young. Americans were more patriotic and happy with their progress as a nation, and the arts and the humanities reflected that. So yeah, and that's pretty much how we have everything going on now. Thank you for listening, and I hope you can give me, I hope you enjoyed. Thank you.